video is going to serve as kind of a README first video associated with the 6.3 lesson that we'll do over our next few classes. You're going to be working from a notes packet, and you'll be using videos that I built in 2019. The content, obviously, of the videos might be a little bit different, but not by very much. I've done a little bit of tweaking of the notes that you'll see because of the fact that we're into a distance learning environment. So what I'd like to do is just highlight a couple of these key elements as you go along, as you get ready to watch that video. And the first thing that I want to mention is I'm going to ask you to just kind of freeze the video as you get started. You can do this right now, as a matter of fact. I'd like you to go to your unit circle, and I'd like you to fill in all these values. What's the sine of 0? What's the cosine of 0? So on and so forth. Notice a couple things as we're working along. We're going to be working in radians mode, and we're going to use t as our independent variable. But you ought to be able to fill out both of these columns and then go ahead and dot those points on your graph, and then I'd like you to connect them graphically. And one of the things that we'll talk about, you'll see more of this as we go along. When you graph these functions, here's what I want you to consider as the pattern. Think of it, what it truly is. It is a wave pattern. So as you get ready to connect all your points, don't do a zigzag. Do a nice little wave structure as you draw. So that's one of the first things to just kind of highlight. Then you can go ahead and get these things built, watch the video, start filling in all the other pieces associated with this. As you get going, you'll work on a couple other things. You're going to do some basic transforms. You're going to have your graph of sine t and cosine t from the first page. I'm going to ask you to build y equals negative sine t, y equals negative cosine t. You'll do that on pages 2 and page 3. After you go through this, please make sure that you are very comfortable with the 4 different drawing patterns for these graphs. Sine, positive sine, negative sine, positive cosine, negative cosine. Just watch how those patterns, how you will draw those waves. Go back if you need to, but review, but listen very carefully to this part of the lecture. We're going to transform all of our sine and cosine functions to build some pretty complicated models. We'll actually find out that those models that we'll build map perfectly to real life phenomena, such as how we move along when we're moving in a circular motion. Actually, one of the key things, the sine and cosine functions, every sound that you hear is modeled by a sine and cosine function. More about that a little bit down the road. But be comfortable with all these different types of transformations. We're going to start working with them as we move through the subsequent parts of the 6.3 lecture. Please make sure you read the important distance learning comments that you see up here in your notes. They're not in the video, they're right here. We're going to use Desmos. In Google Classroom, I've already put a link out there to a couple saved graphs. One is the saved graph of the cosine parent function. The other is the saved graph of the sine parent function. Just like the thing that you already graphed back on page 1. My models are going to work with the sine function as I start to do the transformations. And what I'd like you to do is go to the links that you have in Desmos, bring up the sine graph, and then I want you to go ahead and the next line in Desmos, you can add additional graphs. And I'd like you to do it kind of one at a time. So when you pull up Desmos, you'll see y equals sine of t. What I'd like you to do is just go down to the next line and type y equals 2 sine of t and look at the difference between the two graphs. You'll be able to make some notes there and see, oh, wow, what happens when I go from y equals sine of t to y equals 2 sine of t? What's the difference in the graphs? And then I'd like you to do that for the other 3 graphs that are suggested down here as well. The simplest way is to probably just go ahead and erase the item that you put on line 2. So in other words, if you got y equals 2 sine t, wipe it out, and then go ahead and insert y equals 1/2 sine t. Could you put all 5 of these out there in Desmos? Yeah, they give you plenty of room to do that. It's just that your screen might get a little bit too busy for you to be able to see the different graphs and be able to compare and contrast them easily. So I suggest that you do it one at a time. So the video will talk through a little bit of that. You won't see most of those on the video. But just be comfortable. Work through these. I think you'll see very quickly what these different transformations do. You'll have some work problems to do subsequent to that in the last couple pages. I think you'll understand these without too much difficulty. And then at the end of the lesson, what you'll see on the video is just kind of some hand scratch things that I did. I just arbitrarily built a couple functions with one of my classes last year. These are the two that you see down there, and asked my students to go ahead and graph them. Watch the video. You should be able to do these too. I want you to do them on a blank piece of paper, and that'll kind of get us through the gist of this lesson. So hopefully that gives you a good idea as to kind of some expectations as you walk through, and a lot of this will apply to just about everything we'll do in section 6.3. Thanks for your time, and good luck as we go through this.